We'll start this morning with some big breaking news.
The high-profile case surrounding Luigi Mangione has taken yet another dramatic turn after a judge dismissed the state terrorism charges that had been hanging over him for months, while maintaining the far more direct and severe second-degree murder charge. For weeks, prosecutors had sought to tie Mangione's alleged actions to wider political motivations, framing them under state-level terrorism statutes. However, the court found that the evidence presented failed to meet the threshold required to classify his actions as terrorism, even as it ruled that there was enough substance to proceed with the murder count. The ruling has drawn both relief and frustration in equal measure, sparking a larger debate over how the law distinguishes between terrorism and violent criminal acts, and what that means for justice in such polarizing cases. Mangione's defense team had argued vigorously that the terrorism allegations were an overreach by prosecutors. They insisted that the labeling of his alleged crime as an act of terrorism was a politically motivated strategy designed to intensify public anger and increase the pressure on the court. Their central argument was that terrorism charges require a demonstrable intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or to influence government policy through violence or threats. In their view, nothing about Mangione's case, however shocking the alleged crime itself might be, fit that framework. The judge appeared to agree, noting that the prosecution's evidence did not convincingly establish the broader ideological motive required to justify a terrorism indictment. Yet, while the terrorism charges have been dropped, Mangione is far from exonerated. The second-degree murder charge is still firmly in place, and it remains the most consequential part of the case. Unlike first-degree murder, which demands proof of premeditation and planning, second-degree murder does not require the state to prove forethought. Instead, it encompasses killings that are intentional but not preplanned, or those resulting from dangerous conduct that shows a depraved disregard for human life. In practical terms, the judge's ruling means that Mangione is still facing a potential life sentence if convicted, with the court focusing its attention squarely on the underlying violence rather than any broader political implication. The dismissal of the terrorism charge has prompted mixed reactions from legal experts and public commentators. Some argue that the move represents a triumph for due process and precision in the application of law, preventing a slippery slope where the label of terrorism could be too easily applied to a wide range of crimes. Others, however, believe the dismissal downplays the gravity of the case, especially if the act did instill fear or was meant to send a message beyond the immediate act of violence. This tension between the legal standards of terrorism and the social perception of it is not new, but cases like Mangione's bring the debate into sharper focus, particularly when public outrage is already running high. For the prosecution, the loss of the terrorism count is a setback, but not necessarily a crippling one. Prosecutors stress that the murder charge itself is more than sufficient to hold Mangione accountable for what they describe as a brutal and deliberate act. They also noted that terrorism charges are notoriously difficult to sustain because of the high bar required to prove intent to intimidate a population or influence policy. By focusing instead on the murder case, they may avoid protracted legal battles over semantics and concentrate on the evidentiary foundation that directly connects Mangione to the alleged killing. Meanwhile, the defense is hailing the ruling as a partial victory, framing it as proof that prosecutors had attempted to inflate the severity of the case by pursuing terrorism charges that never belonged there. They argue that this overreach could cast doubt on the credibility of the state's case as a whole, potentially benefiting their client when it comes to the jury's perception. However, they also face the difficult reality that a murder charge, especially one with significant evidence, will be much harder to fend off in court. Their strategy moving forward will likely shift to undermining the reliability of witness accounts, forensic findings, and any circumstantial evidence that ties Mangione directly to the killing. Beyond the courtroom, the case is being closely watched by the public and the media, who have been captivated by its twists and turns. The terrorism charges had originally intensified the case's profile, drawing attention from across the country and even internationally. Now, with those charges gone, some wonder if the story will lose some of its broader resonance, narrowing into what may look more like a tragic but not unprecedented criminal trial. Still, the ongoing murder charge ensures the trial remains highly consequential, with victims' families, advocacy groups, and politicians continuing to voice strong opinions about what justice should look like. This ruling also raises questions about the future application of state terrorism laws. Critics of the statutes have long argued that they are too vague, leaving too much room for interpretation by prosecutors and judges. If Mangione's case is any indication, courts may be more reluctant to allow terrorism charges unless there is overwhelming evidence of a clear political or ideological motive. This could limit the scope of terrorism prosecutions in state courts, confining them to only the most explicit cases of political violence or coordinated campaigns of fear. On the other hand, the debate could also fuel calls for reform, with some legislators potentially seeking to broaden or clarify the definitions to make them more enforceable. At the center of all this remains Mangione himself, whose fate now hinges on the murder proceedings. Public records and testimony in earlier hearings suggest a complex picture of his life, motivations, and circumstances leading up to the alleged crime. But until the trial begins in full, much remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the stakes remain incredibly high. A murder conviction could see him spend the rest of his life behind bars, while an acquittal or reduction of charges could ignite a firestorm of controversy given the public attention the case has already received. For now, the judge's decision serves as a reminder of the delicate balance courts must strike in navigating public pressure, legal definitions, and the pursuit of justice. Dropping the terrorism charges may shield the court from accusations of politicization, but it also highlights the challenges of prosecuting crimes that sit at the intersection of violence and ideology. The continuation of the murder case, meanwhile, ensures that accountability for the alleged act itself remains the focus. As the case heads toward trial, all eyes will remain fixed on the courtroom, waiting to see how the legal battle unfolds and what final judgment will ultimately be delivered.